Hi, welcome to Every Believer Confident. My name is Mark Farnham, and with me today is our research assistant, Jeff Mindler.
Good to be here.
And we are talking about the art of conversation, especially when it relates to apologetics. We want to ask, how do we have effective conversations with unbelievers so that we can share Jesus Christ with them, answer their questions, even just turning the conversation to spiritual things. So we're going to chat a little bit about that today.
Yeah, and I think it's important as we set out to recognize that this is a skill that can be developed and can be improved on. And I think you and I would probably both admit, this is something we're still growing on and continuing to learn. And so be encouraged, if you're not used to this, it is something you can grow in and learn. And so we're all growing and learning in that regard. And so we want to try to help encourage one another in our conversations to grow and advance.
That's right. And some people are naturally gifted in conversation. I remember when I was a pastor many years ago, one of my best friends in the church, his name is Chris, could start a conversation about spiritual things with anyone. We'd go to Dunkin' Donuts and be going through the drive-thru, and he would start a conversation about Jesus, and the cars would be piling up behind us, and the woman at the window would talk to him and engage him in conversation. I thought, how do you do that? That would feel so awkward to me, but he had an unusual ability. So recently we found an article about Charles Spurgeon, and the article is entitled "The Art of Conversation on Being Natural in Our Evangelism." And he gives some good suggestions for learning to have good conversations, because that really is the essence of sharing your faith. It's not to be a monologue. It's not to be a cornering of someone and then working through a script. That's how many of us were taught evangelism. So, Jeff, what can we get from this article about the art of conversation that will help us in seeking to share the good news of Jesus?
Yeah. Well, the first point that they really bring up, and you hinted at this, is don't dominate the conversation. And what they really mean by that, and they unpack this further, is learning how to ask good questions, so that we're not engaging in a monologue of just, this uninterrupted speech that we're going on, but learning how to ask questions of others and really listen, so that we're not the only ones speaking and the only ones dominating the conversation. So
That's right. I think about every time my wife and I go to Costco. When you walk in, you initially pass all the items that they want you to buy that are on sale for a short period of time. And then you have to walk by the dreaded cell phone salesman. I don't know if you've experienced this, but they're waiting for you. And they lock eyes with you, and they'll start to talk with you. And you just try to avoid them. Sometimes we go the back way once we get inside the store just to avoid them, because we know they're going to try to sell us on something. They're going to start their monologue of, are you happy with your cell service? And we don't want to come across that way when we're talking about Jesus. We're not selling a product, right, Jeff? We're not selling Jesus, as some would claim that we are.
Right.
And so start a conversation by asking questions, genuine questions. I often say the first step ought to be just show an interest in them. Genuinely, as a person made in God's image and for whom Christ died, I should be interested in this other person enough to show a genuine interest in who they are, what their life is like, what their story is.
Yeah, and even that could be as basic as beginning that conversation with, hey, do you mind if I ask you a couple questions? Maybe, hey, would you mind if I asked you a question that might come across as a little on the personal side? And you will be surprised with how many people, by simply front loading that, you want to launch into a series of questions, but before doing that, just simply starting the conversation out with that initial question of whether or not you can ask them other questions, because what that does is it actually invites people into the conversation. They feel like they've actually been invited into a conversation. So something as simple as that, of starting a conversation with, hey, do you mind if I ask you a few questions, or a question that might be a little personal in nature, and you'll be surprised with how many people are like, oh yeah, sure, go ahead.
So basically, you're asking permission to ask a question that is more personal in nature,
Hmm.
and the person might say, "No, thank you." Does that ever happen?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And doesn't that hurt you and make you want to go and suck your thumb in a corner?
No, personally not.
Maybe
Um,
for you it does. When I was younger, I had a terrible fear of rejection about anything, whether I was trying to sell something or whether I was trying to share the good news of Jesus. And I had to learn that if a person didn't want to talk, it's okay. And God used a number of things in my life to learn this. In a summer preacher boy program, we now call it pastoral intern program. The pastor of my church in Wisconsin had me go around and knock on the door of every single home in 2 towns in central Wisconsin. And for an introvert at the time, I've changed, I've become an extrovert. I couldn't imagine anything worse. And I had to wear a suit, and Wisconsin in the summer is about 100% humidity constantly. So knocking on doors, walking from door to door, most people just saying, not interested, no thank you. Occasionally someone would listen to my spiel as I invited them to church. But one of the good things that came out of that was I got over the fear of rejection. It's like, okay, well, that's the 35th home in a row where they've said no, and now it doesn't hurt so bad anymore. And then a few years later, when I was in seminary, I worked for a newspaper, and part of my job was overseeing home delivery, training young people to deliver homes. But one of the things we had to do was do sales drives, and I would take these young people around and we would knock on doors selling the newspaper. So God knew what I needed to get over my fear of rejection. So if you're trying to start a conversation with someone about spiritual things, and to get to the point of telling them about the good news of the gospel, and they are not interested in talking, don't take it so personally. They might not just be ready at that time. But as you said, more often than not, if you ask permission to talk about important things or personal things, people will say yes.
Yeah, because they're curious about what you're
Yes,
going to
what you're going to
ask.
ask. Yeah.
And so if nothing else, the level of curiosity that you build by just simply asking that first question, I mean, most people are, oh yeah, sure, go ahead. Now after that, depending on the direction you take the conversation, if you start asking them, well, could you tell me a little bit about like your religious background? Maybe then they go, oh, I don't really want to talk about that. But you got past that first initial step. And if they don't want to talk about it at that point, just, then that aspect of, the rejection part, but it doesn't sting as much. And, we can still pray for that individual that, maybe, Lord, soften their heart and then bring somebody else along. If you don't really know them, you don't know if you'll have another conversation with them again, but the Lord can bring somebody else, to potentially pick up that conversation and build upon it. So that's the beauty of serving and worshiping a sovereign God is we can trust Him, that He will accomplish His purpose. And maybe I get, just an inch with this person, but then the next person that comes along, they get a foot. And it just keeps you building and building, and we can trust that God is sovereign and He will accomplish His plans.
That's good. One of the things we've talked about in other videos is the importance of questions. When I teach people how to share their faith, one of the hardest things is to get them to stop talking.
Yeah.
Many people have this monologue mindset. I've got to tell the whole story of the gospel from beginning to end, and then put the person on the spot at that moment to believe right then and there, as opposed to asking questions that lead toward an interest in spiritual things. And there's a well-known apologetics book entitled Making Faith Magnetic by Dan Strange. And it's one of many books that talk about the big questions of life. So if I'm talking to someone, I might not ask them right away, do you know who Jesus is? Or, who do you think Jesus is? Although those are good questions as well. But I might ask the person, why do you think we're here? And let them talk, let them answer. What you'll find as they give an answer is you'll discover where they are spiritually, what they're thinking, what they believe. So why are we here? Or something like, how does a person find purpose? Or a question like, what do you think happens to us when we die? Or a question like, what do you think is wrong with the world? I like this one because everyone, regardless of their religious belief, thinks that the world is not the way it's supposed to be. So ask the person, what do you think is wrong with the world? And let them answer and ask some follow-up questions. And then along with that, what do you think would make things right? Like, we all hope that the world will become a better place. What will it take to really make it heaven on earth, to be a place of perfection? And let that person answer. And what you'll find is they will say things that'll open up more questions, where ultimately then we can turn it around and say, here's what I believe is the answer. The answer is we're estranged from the God who made us to be in covenant fellowship with him. And God has acted in Jesus Christ to draw us back to him. And only when a person believes in Christ is he restored to God. And our hope then is in the return of Jesus Christ, who will make all things right.
Yeah. And another great question, to add to that list of really good questions too. One that came to mind is just asking people a little bit more direct, but just simply asking them, do you think that God exists? And what is he like? You'll be surprised, I think, just the amount of people. Even I find this ironic, talking with atheists that have a very strong belief that God doesn't exist, but they are more than willing to tell you, what they think of the God of the Bible and why they reject him and such. So they're more than willing to talk. So even that question of, do you think God exists and what is he like? Is another great question to get the conversation really steered towards those spiritual matters as well.
Yeah. Well, we hope through this video you're encouraged to start conversations with those who don't know Christ. Not every conversation results in the ability to share the good news of Jesus, but think of it, as we've talked about in previous videos, think of it as planting seeds. Every opportunity I have to have a conversation and to bring up spiritual things is a seed planted. And because our trust is in the Holy Spirit of God to work in that person's life, to draw them to an awareness of their guilt and their need for Christ, I can just play my part in every conversation. So I might have multiple conversations with the same person or just one. This happens when I fly on an airplane or, I'm at a train station or coffee shop. And it's God who's doing the work of saving people in this world, reconciling people to himself. And I have a part to play, and God invites me to participate in that person's salvation for my joy. And therefore, I should approach any situation as an opportunity for a conversation, and I'll go as far in that conversation as they'll let me. And if they say, I don't want to talk about this anymore, that's okay as well. And I get to have the joy of participating in sharing the good news of Jesus Christ. Any final thoughts?
Yeah, and that's a great way to think about it, is planting seeds, watering, maybe even, tilling up some rocky soil. And then someone else comes along and plants the seed, but recognizing it's God who gives the growth, and we can trust that he is good and he will accomplish all his holy will. And we get to be a part of that as, messengers to take the gospel to those in need. And so think about it as, tilling up some rocky soil, planting seeds, watering, and trusting God that he will give the growth.
That's good. So I hope you have a conversation this week with someone who doesn't know Jesus and see where it goes, and just trust God for that, and you will experience the joy of participating in someone's salvation.